Hi, Blogging Heads. I'm Betsy Woodruff. I cover politics for Slate, and I'm here with my good friend Daniel Strauss, who covers politics for Talking Points Memo. This is our regular show, Woodruff and Strauss, and before we dive in, I want you all to know how much blood, sweat, and tears went into making this episode.
This episode. This one, guys.
This is like take 5. We had so many technical difficulties.
You know, Betsy, I gotta say, like, the other day you were like, you know, you really enjoy doing the show and stuff, and I feel the same way. But, like, I feel like we got over the pleasantries of that and proved it to each other by our, like, sheer determination.
I know. Seriously, I shouldn't have said that. I should have knocked on wood, you know? The show is so fun until it's 8:30 in the morning and Skype is like, nope, not gonna work. Anyway, I hope our viewers really, really cherish the next half hour.
It's funny you should mention viewers, Betsy, because there's something I wanted to bring up initially also.
Oh, really?
Really. Breaking this morning on C-SPAN, which we should all watch regularly because it's endless fun. And you might learn a thing or two. And, you know, there's substance in there. Two brothers who happen to be on opposite sides of the political spectrum, Brad Woodhouse and his brother Dallas. Brad is a Democratic operative, and Dallas is a Republican operative. We're on to talk about a documentary, and guess who called but their mother, which, as a journalist, is one of my nightmares. And I immediately called my mother, who said she's going to do it. So there it goes, Mom. Luckily for us, Woodruff and Strauss does not have callers right now. We screen...
It's really nice, yeah.
We screen our audience questions, which we're going to have today. Thank God for that.
As long as we're talking about parents, I think... So I basically never read internet comments. I every once in a while will read them on Gawker, because sometimes Gawker has entertaining commenters. But as a general rule, my entire politics reporting career, National Review, Washington Examiner, now it's Slate... I don't read comments. I just don't do it. And from time to time, I've written things that have gotten kind of acrimonious, uncharitable comments. And the reason that I know this is because my mom reads them. And she'll say, Betsy, commenters they really didn't like that story you wrote. Out. Just say, no skin off my nose. I have no idea. I avoid them at all costs. And I wish there was a way to communicate to internet commenters that anything they say to try to hurt my feelings is not actually going through me. You're actually hurting my mother. So
don't hurt moms. Moms, don't call into C-SPAN.
My mom is reading these, you know? Do you want my mom to be sad? Do you want her to think that I'm a crazy, stupid rhino who doesn't know what American politics is? I hope you don't.
I don't think that of you at all.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome. Not a rhino. Anyway, it's been a busy few days. You're on the Capitol right now, right, Betsy?
I was yesterday. Okay. I'm not there right now.
Okay. Usually we see each other, but we're doing it the old-fashioned way today.
Recording this face to face.
Right. Knock on wood.
Old school. Yeah.
But it's been a crazy few days. The Senate avoided a government shutdown, and they did that despite, the nuisance of both Ted Cruz and who's being called the Ted Cruz of the left, Elizabeth Warren. And essentially, in this sort of weekend session on Saturday, they finally passed a bill. Keeping the government open for about a year, a little bit less. This came after Elizabeth Warren objected and told House Democrats to oppose the bill until a provision rolling back Dodd-Frank was removed. And then on Saturday, Ted Cruz came in and tried to fight President Obama's executive action on amnesty by essentially holding up the vote. It's confusing procedural stuff. But that was sort of it. Betsy, what to make of all of this? And I feel like we're still reeling from this. Or not reeling, but like the shadow of what happened over the weekend is still there.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I was gone over the weekend, and I took a little Twitter respite, so I didn't even realize any of this was going on until Saturday at like 3 p.m. when I checked my email. I was like, what? Chaos in the Senate? I don't understand.
They're not getting anything done, but they're
sometimes
arguing?
You're a reporter and you assume you can take weekends off, and you're totally wrong. No, I think there's a couple interesting things here. One thing that I find striking about it is that I think the part of the continuing resolution or the government funding bill that specifically funds the Department of Homeland Security and the components of the federal government responsible for implementing the president's immigration action. I'm pretty sure their funding runs out in a couple months. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's
in
right.
February.
So Cruz is getting ready for that too.
It's interesting that we're going to have a funding fight that doesn't put the entire government shutdown at risk. It's only the only question is going to be how do we fund these specific agencies. That strikes me as a different kind of funding battle than we've had in the past, right?
Right.
Because the government shutting down isn't at stake. So I think that gives Republicans a lot more leverage to pressure the president to maybe make changes in the way that he's enforcing immigration that they wouldn't have had if the president could say, what, you want to shut down the government?
Right.
So I think that's going to be really interesting. I think strategically, Republicans are in a good place heading into that fight. And that's something I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. But it strikes me as a smart strategic move.
I think.
What do you think about that?
I am surprised that people aren't talking about this, and frankly, this is an angle that I haven't heard too much about. I like your initial analysis on this. I think it sounds pretty good. My one thing is that, do you think people care? Do you think people pay attention to this stuff? And
no,
okay, so what
definitely
are they gonna, this fight happens.
People don't pay attention to this stuff until there are World War II veterans climbing over barricades.
Right. Okay.
That's when people start paying attention.
So I just wonder,
and for better or for worse, that gives Congress a lot of cover.
Right.
When they're making all these spending deals.
So people just roll their eyes on Saturday night, and we ran into each other at a holiday party. They're at their holiday parties. They're not thinking about this, and I came in. I had my press pass on because I was still in the Hill, but most people weren't. I'm sorry. I know. I sound like
that guy.
Yeah. So that's kind of what they were doing, I guess. So people don't really. People are just sort of this is Congress and roll their eyes. But isn't it? It just strikes me as shouldn't it be damaging both to Democrats and Republicans that they're still arguing over keeping the government open and what should be routine has become, a flashpoint for skirmishes and hostage taking, noble stands and strategic moves for 2016 and all that.
It doesn't bother me. And the reason it doesn't bother me is because it's a way of regularly having substantive policy debates in general, I think. Mm-hmm. I think the president's immigration action got a lot more coverage because there was the funding war over it. I think the Dodd-Frank changes that were built into the government funding bill got a lot more attention. People talked about them. Mm-hmm. I think it gives regular voter. I hope it makes regular voters aware of the fact that if they call their congressman about specific issues, that matters.
Yeah, I don't think it does that. I don't think people.
I think to an extent it can.
Really? You have more faith than I do.
Well, during the last government shutdown, part of the reason that Tea Party Republicans were so staunch and so firm for as long as they were about keeping the government closed was because they were getting tons of phone calls, mm-hmm. because there were huge rallies, because people showed up. I think you really can't underestimate how much impact it makes on congressional offices for them to get 500 phone calls or for their Facebook pages to get swamped. This stuff can sometimes make a difference. Maybe not a big enough difference to keep a funding bill from getting passed, but even in the case of the Cromnibus bill that passed last week, it was a vote away from failing.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. And I think there can definitely be value in people paying attention to what's going on the Hill and following how spending measures are made and keeping track of all that stuff. It doesn't bother me.
Are you happy with? Do you think this Cromnibus was I think it's a good thing that the government didn't shut down. Beyond that, I don't really know. What do you think of what passed? Do you think there was anything in there that was particularly objectionable or noteworthy or remarkable?
Well, I think there's components of the Cromnibus bill that could upset everybody.
Yeah.
It was the amazing piece of legislation that had something for everyone to hate. There was stuff going after DC's marijuana legalization initiative, designed to make that difficult. So if you're a DC home rule person or if you're an advocate of cannabis law reform, That's a huge problem. Obviously, there was the Dodd-Frank stuff that Elizabeth Warren and progressive populists were very miffed about. It basically made it possible so that donors can have unlimited campaign contributions to national parties like the DNC and the RNC.
Yeah.
That's something that some campaign finance reform people get very irate about. And then on the conservative side of the spectrum, you have spending hikes, right? You have obviously the funding of the president's immigration move, and then just a host of other things that people are miffed about. But then also a lot of people had problems just with the way it was procedurally put through. And this is something that it surprises me people to talk about this more. In 2010, House Republican leadership, a couple weeks before the wave election that changed the way Capitol Hill works, House Republican leadership released a pledge to America, and in that pledge they said, these are the kind of policies that we're going to focus on, and this is how we're going to implement them. These are the procedural strategies that we're going to use when we're in charge that will make the House work better. And included in that list of strategies was giving people enough time to read legislation. So saying that there'd be 3 days between when legislation drops and when there's a vote.
Isn't that something that I think Mike Lee, isn't that a sticking point for Mike Lee, I think, or something like that? There was some...
I think a lot of these Tea Party guys talk about
it.
But it's especially notable that House leadership made this pledge, and then House leadership also pledged that on must-pass legislation, so on legislation like the Crownibus, that has to pass to keep the government open, they wouldn't attach measures that have nothing to do with the specific must-pass bill. And in the case of the Crownibus, leadership violated both components of the pledge. And talk to House legislators who are Republicans who said, yeah, they're breaking their pledge. So it's not just the substance of the Crownibus that I think a lot of people find upsetting. It's also the way they put it together. It's the fact that members didn't have enough time to read the whole thing. It was something like 1,300, 1,600 pages long, just a mammoth, 1603, right?
Yeah.
Just a mammoth bill. And then, of course, it had tons of provisions that had nothing to do with keeping the government open. So I think it's easy for people to sort of say, well, the government's open, that's great. We kept the government funded, that's great. Hooray, Republicans are showing they can govern. But I do think you have to look at these things on the substance. And you have to look at the way these bills come together. And I think it's totally a fair game to say that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle should feel free to put their feet down and say, we're not funding this because we think it's bad legislation. I think there's often, especially in a lot of mainstream, non-ideological media, there's a hope to be both sides agree, or bipartisan support, or the truth is somewhere down the middle.
I mean,
or at least we're governing, and it's not very helpful analysis, and it glosses over a lot of things that are really important.
Yeah, I think. I want to touch on partially because our Woodruff and Strauss is technically a campaign politics podcast. I want to touch on this financing really briefly, which is really interesting, because it basically it's something I know about. You know a lot more on the Crownibus in general, it sounds like. But one thing that I've done some reporting on that provision, which basically expands donations and let people gets rid of these caps for donating to committees.
Yeah. Right.
That strikes me as really important. Especially since more and more in politics, we're seeing that there is, you have to have rich friends to get anywhere. You have to have, to run for president, you have to have a sugar daddy. And when they roll back these campaign finance laws, that makes that even more true. It means the influence of money and, the attention lawmakers or would-be lawmakers pay to, wealthy donors skyrockets. And that's.
I think what else is interesting. Yeah, I think what else is interesting about.
And it was an alliance of Republicans and Democrats on this, right? That provision.
Right.
Right.
I think yes, exactly. And I think what else is interesting about the fact that campaign finance provision passed is that it's not just about giving to candidates. It's not just about giving to specific campaigns. That provision, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that provision specifically got rid of limits on donating to national political parties.
Yeah.
Now, the DNC is having major financial problems right now.
Right.
They're in tons of debt. So it's very convenient that all of a sudden mega donors can give as much money as they want to the DNC.
What a coincidence.
That's very helpful. What a coincidence. And that's why, yeah, right. And that's probably why there was such strong bipartisan support for the Crownibus. It's hard not to be a little bit cynical about this.
So let's
go on. Obviously, you can have a robust debate about what campaign finance law should look like.
Right.
If it should be significantly different, and the specific way that donors influence policymaking and that political ads influence policymaking. Phil Kerpen at American Commitment, which is a conservative organization, is a very vocal supporter of kind of the campaign finance status quo, at least as I understand his position, and makes an interesting case that big money is not destroying American politics. But I think, and that's not an argument that I can necessarily make compellingly either way. But I think what's interesting is when you have bipartisan support for provisions like these.
Bipartisanship ain't always good, you know. Sometimes it's not the key to America.
Exactly. And I think there's a huge tendency in mainstream lamestream media to assume bipartisan equals good, controversy equals bad, right? Or to assume keeping the government open is a good thing, hooray, the good guys won. Or risking a government shutdown is a bad thing, boo. I think that's a way that media members can sometimes dodge having to really dig into issues that are substantive and important and that people need to be aware of. You know, we changed the law. We changed a lot of law with the passage of Omnibus. And simplifying that to say, hooray, the government's open, I just think you kind of missing the forest for the trees or whatever the
analogy is.
Yeah, right.
So I also want let's move a little bit here and talk about the big players this weekend. Do you want to talk about Ted Cruz or Elizabeth Warren first? Because I feel like they were, I mean, you know, they both played different roles.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's talk about Ted Cruz
Okay,
first.
Let's talk about Ted Cruz. So Cruz, it was old Cruz we saw this weekend, right? It was
vintage Ted Cruz.
Vintage Ted. This is the Kobe beef of classic Ted Cruz. He wanted to have a vote on defunding Obama's executive actions on immigration and essentially held the bill up over the weekend for it. And Democrats realized and were quick to call attention to that. They said, like, Cruz's objections, which Republicans were grumbling about, give us an opportunity to ripen a lot of these nominations, some of which we probably wouldn't have been able to ripen and progress and confirm before we lose control of the Senate because of Cruz.
And Cruz and Lee take major issue with that point.
Right. So their point was that these guys were going to be...
Yeah.
Right. And so all the time all Saturday while they were debating this, Democrats were gleefully, you know, smiling and going around about this. And I'm going to drop a link to my story on that. And Cruz's people and Lee's people in particular were like, no, these guys were going to get confirmed anyway. Essentially, and there was a lot of discussion about this in the gallery. Essentially, a lot of these guys were going to get confirmed anyway, but it gave them more time, and you never know. And that's sort of like the middle ground here.
Right, and that's a big question. Is exactly how much did Cruz and Lee's weekend tactics impact the presidency?
We'll never know, but like what strikes me as the bigger, more important point in all of this is that like it really was Cruz bucking the GOP and, you know, a lot of the body right now.
And it's not just Cruz bucking the GOP to sort of go rogue or go it alone with Senator Mike Lee. I think it's important for people to remember that this is not just Cruz by himself. Mike Lee is one of his staunchest allies. He's a very conservative Tea Party member from Utah. And usually anywhere Ted Cruz is, Mike Lee is not far behind. I think they're close friends. They work together on a lot of things. Mike Lee's a really interesting lawmaker.
Yeah, he is actually.
He is. He's interesting because he's not running for president.
And never has. I mean, there's never been discussion.
Right, and clearly shows no interest in running for president. Very interested in lawmaking. Really, really interesting guy. We could do a whole episode on Mike Lee.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think what's interesting about what Cruz did is not only did he take an unusual tack, but he didn't give any other Republican members, as far as we can tell, a public heads up on it.
No.
I talked to
it was a
Dean
complete
Heller,
surprise. I think this started late
Total
Friday.
Surprise, yeah. Nobody knew it was coming. You know, Mitch McConnell, the Senate soon-to-be majority leader, left the chamber, got out of Dodge, assumed everything was going to be adjourned until Monday. And then Cruz and Lee said, oh, wait. So when I talked to Heller last night, who's a Nevada senator, what he said was, obviously members have the right to do whatever they want, right? Members have a right to block votes. They have a right to object to unanimous consent to adjourn for the weekend. But the courtesy and the courtesy that's expected in the Senate is that you at least give your colleagues a heads up.
Yeah.
That Cruz at least would have said in one of the Senate caucus lunches, which are private lunches that only senators of each party go to, that Cruz at least would have said, hey, we're going to do this over the weekend, cancel your plans, give your friend your Nutcracker tickets, we're going to be in town. But I think a lot of the frustration and a lot of reason there was just so much acrimony from Republicans directed at Cruz was because he didn't tell anybody. And it's like, not only is this guy wrecking everybody's weekends, which is his right, which is you're in the Senate, maybe some of your weekends are going to get wrecked, break out the violins. But he didn't even give them a heads up. Yeah. And I understand frustration on that. I mean,
and I think I want to break the glass on this, Betsy. This is my first, and this is the first time I'm going to say this non-ironically, and I hope you don't scowl, but what does this mean for 2016? It just... Eliana Johnson at National Review had a really good story out where she talked to some operatives in Cruz's circle about, how he's shaping up his campaign. He's got some people that actually are not, one thing I've been skeptical about with a Cruz presidential run are whether he would have to dip very deeply into the Tea Party, insurrectionist GOP black market of operatives, because you need good people. And, the people that he seems to have are not B-list people. They're actually pretty good. They're very conservative, and some of them are kind of controversial in their tactics. But these are not, rookies. These are not guys who haven't done campaigns before. But it's just
not JV people.
Right, but it just sort of strikes me as like a weird, I'm wondering if he's thinking about this as he does this. Is this going to help him? Is he going to be like, is he going to craft this into I made DC listen, I really fought here, and Eliana's story.
I feel like Cruz is thinking about 2016 with everything he does.
Yeah. I mean,
as are all these guys, as is Hillary, as is Rubio, as is Rand Paul. I'm confident that Cruz and his staff and his advisors made the 2016 calculation before moving ahead on this weekend. I don't know. I don't have any inside information on that, but I'm confident.
I mean, one of the interesting things in that story, too, was how advisors near the bottom were like, and we worked with Kirsten Gillibrand on sexual assault. I got to be honest, I saw that coming. It just seemed like, you're working with one of the most popular liberal senators who champions all of those stuff and all those things, and she's really cautious. You're gonna trot that out later.
Yeah, and that's fine. Good policy should be good policy.
Yeah, I mean, and Gillibrand's people have said, we even got Rand Paul and Ted Cruz on this, and they do that with this very gleeful sort of haha, can you believe this? We can't either.
Right, yeah, kind of symbiotic relationship. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're being honest. Seems like it's a good faith effort. Seems like Cruz really believes in Gillibrand's military sexual assault reform. If you want to talk about it when you're talking about running for president in 2016, that's great. That's a totally legitimate point that Cruz's supporters can make when they're making the case for it.
Yeah,
100%.
I mean, so I'm not skeptical. I just am sort of. I'd like to know how Cruz thinks this will all help him. Because you need favor from, and this is going to be a big primary. It's going to be a big Republican primary. You need favor from power players in your chamber. You need people to like you and to stump for you and to say, voters, I can bring these guys to you. And
you need people to court donors, and you need people to help you plan. And the fact is, here's what I find interesting about how Cruz is working as a senator. I think what strikes me is that he seems to have absolutely zero concern about what the majority of his fellow Republican Senate colleagues think about what he's doing. And I think no matter how much criticism he gets from people like Susan Collins, who's a Maine Republican, or Jeff Flake, who's an Arizona Republican, no matter what they say and no matter how substantive those criticisms are, sometimes they're substantive, sometimes they're not substantive, but regardless, Cruz can always say, I went to Washington, I shook things up, I stood and fought. When you stand and fight, you make enemies. When you try to make DC listen, you make enemies. this criticism is evidence of my dedication to principle. And
I mean,
and
I
it's
get
basically
that.
a way of
so
saying
you're saying
nobody
he's
should
gonna,
ever listen to criticism
he's
from fellow
trying to
Republicans.
surf
So
the unpopularity of Congress and the fact that he fought that.
I think it's very helpful. I think nobody ever gets in trouble for not being a big enough team player in the Senate.
Yeah.
I don't think that's something that Republican primary voters are going to punish Ted Cruz for. I just don't see it happening. So I think from a political perspective, that calculation made sense. Now, what struck me about the weekend's events was that it didn't seem to make a huge amount of national news. Like, it didn't dominate the news cycle the way all the stories leading up to shutdown last year did.
Right.
I don't think it was ever a Drudge banner.
Maybe not.
I don't think it was central. I don't think it was really central on the Sunday shows. I mean, it was discussed, but it wasn't the big story.
Yeah.
So I don't think Cruz really took over a news cycle the way he's been able to in the past. So if he was doing this as a either he was doing this to make a substantive policy change, in which case the strategy doesn't make sense because it wasn't going to work, and I don't think anybody thought it was going to work. Either he was doing this to make a substantive policy change, or he was doing this because he thought it was politically smart to do. If the latter, then I don't see a huge amount of political benefit to him from doing this, just because, like, you get 2 days of stories saying Cruz helped Obama's nominees get through.
Yeah, so
you get Daniel Horowitz at Conservative Review writing about how no, actually he didn't, and on the whole, I just didn't see. I thought Cruz and Lee were both very much on defense when they were explaining why they did what they did over the weekend.
So, okay, that's a good point. I think that's a good tie-in to what I want to talk about on the left, which is Elizabeth Warren. And, so while this was happening, Warren was out there saying, don't pass a spending bill if this Dodd-Frank provision is in there. And over the past 2 weeks or so, we've seen, like, a very aggressive Elizabeth Warren. I think you mentioned in the past, or last episode, or maybe one of our attempts to do this episode, that Warren, like, avoids the press like the plague. Cruz crafts his statements, talks to the press, but doesn't answer questions. Warren sails after she gives a speech.
Can I complain about Elizabeth Warren really fast?
Yeah, sure.
So in Capitol Hill, when senators go from their offices, which are in a different building, to the Senate chamber to vote, they take a little train from their office building to the chamber. They take an elevator up to the chamber. They walk through sort of an anteroom into the Senate chamber. They vote, and then they walk back. And during the transportation process from their offices to vote or from their offices to lunch meetings in the Capitol building, reporters swarm around them and ask them tons of questions and try to get them on the record on things and get quotes and get their views on stuff. Yeah. And the vast majority of senators happily do these. They're called hallway interviews with reporters, and it's incredibly helpful. I
actually like
interviews.
That's
I find
the
it's
core
always more
of
valuable
political
to talk directly to a senator
chasing
than
lawmakers,
to talk.
right? And
totally, yeah. I find it is always really valuable to talk to lawmakers instead of going through flax, instead of getting statements. You get interesting things, you get little tidbits. It's great. It's super helpful. But there are a couple senators who just won't talk to reporters, who just like have blinkers on and barrel through. And if you ask for a comment, they'll say, "I won't talk to you." David Vitter from Louisiana, who's a Republican, who's probably going to be running for governor. Either probably is or definitely is. I forget.
He is.
Yeah. I think it's a given. He doesn't do hallway interviews. Al Franken from Minnesota doesn't do hallway interviews. Maybe Mazie Hirono from Hawaii might not do hallway interviews, although I don't know that I've ever tried her, so I'm not positive about that. And I understand that. Senators don't have to. It's not the law. You're not opposed to the First Amendment if you don't do hallway interviews. It's fine. But Elizabeth Warren won't do them at all, and it's really frustrating. Because it suggests that she's media averse and that she's scared of saying things off the cuff, and maybe her staff doesn't think she's very disciplined. I mean, Cruz will talk to reporters all day. Right. Cruz will give super long hallway interviews. Mike Lee will, and it's very, very helpful. And I have nothing but adulation for these guys for talking to reporters, right? In an unscripted, off-the-cuff context. The fact that Elizabeth Warren won't drives me crazy, and I feel like it drives a lot of other Hill reporters crazy too.
I I think it is a frustrating fact. It is.
Lame.
I think I'm going to say it is frustrating that, Warren is incredibly cautious with the press. As a reporter, it is. I think the effect of this is that her message stays primarily on the topic that she cares about most, which is Wall Street and financial reform, and she's started to stick out on that by doing a few things. But yeah, you're right. This is one of the noteworthy things about Warren, and this has happened fairly recently. We interviewed her about a year ago or 18 months ago, I think, for a story on a student loan bill that she had, which was actually a pretty aggressive and liberal student loan bill. She doesn't do that anymore. That said, she does do interviews, but they are very targeted, and she doesn't do hallway interviews. Warren, over the last few weeks, has done a few things. She's really bucked the Obama administration on this undersecretary for the Treasury, who's actually this big Democratic, favorite. The Obama administration likes him. There have been stories about Warren's opposition to him that mentions that he's a deep donor. He speaks French, I think, or he's been in France for a while. He works for an investment banking company firm called, actually, just say banking company, called Lazare. And he also helps publish the Paris Review. I don't know why all these profiles mention that. Warren has made fun of him for that.
Really?
Or
That's
called him out on that. Yeah, she did. And the thing, her knock is that he's too close to Wall Street. And, what's resulted in this is that this nomination fight for this guy, Antonio Weiss, has gotten far more attention than it usually does. And some Republicans seem to be aligning with the Obama administration or open to the idea of supporting Weiss, and others are kind of with Warren. So it's creating an interesting divide here. But there's that, and then over the weekend, she made this call to House Democrats outside her chamber to oppose the spending bill because it had this Dodd-Frank provision in there.
When you say made the call, is that a floor speech?
Yeah, she made a floor speech.
Gave a floor speech. Yeah.
That is, and I hate to say this, I'm pulling out all the phrases I try and avoid. It does sound like Cruz, hence to this day,
definitely.
We have a lot of stories and think pieces and counter think pieces about whether Elizabeth Warren is the Cruz of the left. I don't think so. She didn't do as much she just, said, this is where I stand, and I think other people should stand with me. And she let the bill go through. She lost. The Dodd-Frank provision was in there. So.
Well, Cruz lost too.
Yeah, Cruz lost too. I don't get the sense also that she's as reviled on the left, even among Democrats who don't agree with her, as some Democrats feel about Cruz. And the final 100%. Point...
I mean, Democrats made a special leadership position for her.
Yeah.
Republicans would not do that
They made a special leadership position for her, and then, very quietly, some of the more mainstream or Wall Street friendly Democrats, Chuck Schumer, wanted Mark Warner, a senator from Virginia, to sort of be there to counterbalance her. And on Friday evening, they announced that Mark Warner was getting the same job. But we're seeing a rise in that. And then the final point is that on the left, there is a very, very active movement among outside liberal groups and sort of a burgeoning movement called Ready for Warren that wants her to run for president. Most recently, she did an interview with NPR where she was asked that question. She said, "I'm not running for president," and she was pressed on her 10th choice. So she was asked whether she will ever run for
I've heard that.
And she said, "I'm not."
Are you going to run for president? And she says, "I'm not running for president."
Do you want me to put...
Meaning I am not literally running for president right this second. That's my favorite... That's my favorite thing about all of this. All people are like, wait, but she didn't say she won't run for president in the future.
Right, and some of those groups are saying, those groups who want her to run for president are like, we think, that shows she's, still opening the door to it or something.
She's open to it. She hasn't closed the door.
Cruz has done the other thing. His people are not denying this to reporters, but they're not sourcing on it. He's definitely hinting on it. So those are the contrasts between the two.
Yeah.
I
think another interesting contrast is that I don't think at least Warren has actively, visibly courted House Democrats and tried to shore up influence among them, right. the same way that Cruz has actively, visibly courted House Republicans. You just don't see it. I mean, like, it's possible she's having a whole bunch of behind the scenes secret meetings that we don't know about, but I think we would know about them. And it certainly seems like that's not happening. Like, the hallmark of Cruz is getting House Republicans together at Tortilla Coast a couple of days before the government got shut down.
We're gonna
say, here's our game.
I'm gonna link to that. That was broken by Matt Fuller at Roll Call, and Matt's a mensch. Yeah. I love that story. It was just really fun, and it still lives.
Yeah, it was a big deal. So, and you just don't see that happening with Elizabeth Warren. Yeah. Maybe, it's possible she's open to it. It's possible that this could happen in the future. But as of now, I feel like, let me rephrase this. I feel like Cruz is doing everything in his power to influence House Republicans, but Warren is not doing everything in her power to influence House Democrats.
Yeah,
and I think that's the big difference, and I think that's why you can't say, well, obviously they're not the same, but I think that's a really important difference between the two of them.
I think that's a good point. But the thing is about it also is I'm wondering, I think we're still going to wait and see whether some of, like, Warren's current crusades are going to pay off. Like, one of the most interesting things about the Weiss nomination was that Kirsten Gillibrand, who's by far, no beau of the anti-Wall Street,
right.
wing of the Democratic Party, said she was open to listening to Warren's argument and possibly opposing Weiss's nomination. That's huge because Gillibrand is very careful. She is, she knows how to play the game on the Hill, and if she's willing to do something, I mean, Wall Street and New York and senators from that region are key to Democratic fundraising, and if one of their major senators is starting to be a little cautious about that, I mean, that's a big blow for the Obama administration on this nomination.
And even if she's just saying that because she needs to say it, it also signals that she feels there's enough political room for her to express doubt,
right.
and that she thinks there can be political benefits to questioning the president's nomination.
Right.
So even if she doesn't really mean it, right, even if this is just a messaging thing, I think it's still interesting.
Clearly, Warren Gillibrand 2016. It's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the theme of this weekend was radicals, man, just all the way.
Blood in the streets.
Yeah.
Guillotine getting dragged to the front steps of the Capitol.
I mean, that's how I like to spend my Saturday nights. I had fun doing that.
It's interesting. It is interesting.
Yeah.
Can't complain.
We got to go to a few questions we've got. And then we've got one big one personal one that you and I talked about beforehand that I still, bring them on.
Okay.
One thing was Noah Christula Green asked, is Chris Hughes history's greatest monster? He's referring to the owner of the New Republic, who recently experienced a mass exodus and basically denouncement by a lot of key players because he wanted to make it more, internet integrated.
A digital media company?
Yeah, something
Is
like that.
Is that the term?
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
No, Noah, he's not the biggest monster. It is an unfortunate divorce to watch, I think.
I don't know. I might disagree with you on that.
Really? Why do you go?
Just kidding. No, he's not history's biggest monster. Oh. I mean, look, this is like
this happens.
What Chris Hayes did is the magazine equivalent of running around the Louvre with a can of spray paint.
Right.
He took a really beautiful, important, culturally valuable, historic entity and set of traditions and was just like, we need to make news more snackable.
Right.
And precipitated sort of a mass dispersion of incredibly talented people. There's a finite number of platforms for really thoughtful, curious, critical, liberal, but moderate/liberal long-form journalism.
Right.
There's just not a lot of places that are doing it well, and arguably no place did it as well as New Republic did. And
they had their moments. I'll give you that.
I see no Chris Hughes defenders. They obviously published a lot of things that were stupid, and that had major problems.
Right.
But as a whole, their legacy is really significant on American history, on American letters.
The sobering thing about
not just in terms of political journalism, but also in terms of culture writing and literary.
Yeah, they're back of the book.
I mean, Leon Wieseltier's basic criticism of American culture right now, I find very compelling and very important. And the fact that and his criticism is basically American culture is too digital and too divorced from tradition and too thoughtless. And the fact that he left because the publication that aired, that provided a platform for him to make those arguments became too digital and too divorced from tradition is just, it's ugly.
It's shocking.
And I don't see anyone defending Chris Hughes. I don't see anyone making the case for Chris Hughes is doing a good job running the New Republic.
Right.
Like, no one. So, maybe not. Chris Hughes desecrated something very good. And we have a special place of ignominy in the annals of history for people who desecrate things that are beautiful and valuable. Does that make him history's greatest monster? No. But he messed something up in a way that not many people ever get the chance to mess something up, and in a way that, at least at this point, seems very permanent and sort of uniquely awful. So, boo. I'm sympathetic with Noah on this point.
My thing is, publications live and die, and that's what, sooner or later, most publications
but some publications live for 100 years, right? And
institutions like that, I would be sad to see The Economist go. I'd be sad to see The Times go. I'd be sad to see The New Yorker go, and I feel like the footprint of the New Republic is in that vein, albeit much smaller than the previously mentioned one.
Without a doubt. I mean, Cat Fancy also shuttered in the same time frame.
Right.
But there's not a mob going after the historic monster who destroyed Cat Fancy. Although one can make the case.
Right. We got two more I want to tackle. One is from Miranda Frum, who asked, Americans don't walk anymore. Why don't Americans walk anymore? It's funny Miranda should mention that, because there was this big water main burst today, and DC Metro was even worse than usual. I think Miranda's in Israel right now.
I didn't know that. That's awful.
Yeah. So that was why your commutes may have been worse. I picked up on that.
Awful.
So, yeah.
Awful.
Nightmare. I think Miranda's right. We need to walk way more or bike.
I think that's a good question. Yeah. My guess would be that it has to do with city density, the fact that American cities are not very walkable. I feel like Americans who I feel like I walk a ton. When I lived in New York, I walked a ton, but when I went to college in a tiny little town in Michigan, I hardly walked at all. So I think it has to do with is walking the most efficient form of transportation?
Yeah.
And when walking is not the most efficient form of transportation, people are going to take other forms of transportation. So the fact that our most of our cities are built around other forms of transportation and are built in a way so that walking is very inefficient disincentivizes people from walking, which is bad, because walking is really good for you. Right. Henry David Thoreau has a great essay on going for walks for 10 miles and how awesome it is, and it's true, walking is great. People should walk more. It's an important question.
I'm very pro walking. I do think that it's an efficiency question, because I like to use my commute to also read and just do other things, and I probably should be walking.
Yeah.
But in the summer, I like to bike. Last question we got today is a big one. This is actually asked by a few people.
Commie.
It comes from, I guess I'm going to cite, Alejandra Owens here on this, who asked, she basically saw on Twitter some of my friends asking, accusing me of being a secret Republican. And I'm going to take this one.
A crypto conservative?
Yeah, something like that. I have, I have friends on both sides of the aisle. And I think, we met at CPAC, Betsy. And I think
it was a really beautiful moment.
My experience in DC and interaction between both sides is that a lot of people are very surprised when people of the opposite ideological bent are not fire breathers, and they do perform introspection and navel gazing and all that. I have not found that there is one side with only agreeable characters and there is another side with only disagreeable characters. And I'm just going to keep hanging out with the people who like Walking Dead and, mac and cheese, and I'm making homemade mac and cheese soon. And,
sounds really good.
Like good craft beer, and that I know includes...
Even if they're Republicans?
Even if they're Republicans and Democrats or independents.
Indefensible.
Yeah, I know. So there's my answer to that point, y'all. That's all I got. Do you have any...
When I moved from New York to DC, I remember sort of thinking that, like, because I worked at National Review at the time, that liberals would kind of look at me askance, and I'd be treated with, like, some sort of skepticism, or like I had leprosy or something. And I was very pleasantly surprised when people were super nice and welcoming and friendly. And I feel really bad for people who only have friends who agree with them on everything. My life is more interesting and fun, and I think I'm more intellectually curious because I have friends who think I'm totally wrong about everything. It's really valuable.
Yeah. So bipartisanship can sometimes be bad, but like having lots of friends all over the place can be good, and that's.
Yeah, if you only hang out with people who agree with you on everything, you have a problem.
Yeah. Although I'm told, and the feedback we've got from some of our viewers, I think, is I've heard from a few people they like that we don't ever scream at each other, and we kind of agree on a lot of stuff. So
maybe like at one episode we'll just scream at each other
why don't
for
we
an
just
entire hour
and
get a year's worth of screaming out of our system.
I don't know. Do we have enough screaming energy in there? But like I'd like to see.
Just you wait.
Yeah. Okay, Betsy. So this was great. We finally did it. Thank God.
Hooray! Thank God.
Yeah,
Knock on wood.
And till next time, viewers. Thanks for listening.
Likewise.
Bye.